For 40 days on God, Family, and Guns, we'll be focused on God. We have a series on spiritual warfare, the end of times, the prophecy of Daniel, and the prophecy of Malachi. If you want to see our gun-related or Second Amendment-related content, you can see that on Patreon or the History of Weapons. Those links are below. The enemy's evil ways have been on the earth since mankind has been on the earth. And it's important as we look at what Daniel is about to go through that we see the evil and the Satanism that is behind it all. So if we take a look at Daniel 1, verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel, and some of the king's descendants, and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. Now, ultimately, what we're going to look at today is the evil that comes from the Chaldeans. Because ultimately, Daniel's being led off to Babylon to learn the language and the ways of the Chaldeans. Well, the ways and the language of the Chaldeans is satanic. And we know this to be satanic because if we look at the history of the world, we've seen this spirit of Babylon before, and we'll see it again in the end times. Revelation talks about Mystery Babylon, this spirit of evil that's been in the world from the very beginning. When we look at kind of a timeline, at Adam's fall, there was 1,000 years between Adam and Noah. And then there was another 1,000 years between Noah and Abraham. And shortly before Abraham's birth, there was this man named Nimrod. And it says in Genesis 10:8, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. Now this is the first mighty person. It's the first to bring about a civilization or some sort of empire on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and the land of Shinar. So ultimately what took place was Nimrod began the very first civilization that there was. And it was in the Fertile Crescent Valley, which goes along with history as well, in what people referred to as Mesopotamia. Now, what took place with the Tower of Babel is Nimrod desired to reach to God. So he was building a tower so he can then get to God because of the satanic nature of what Babel was. And it says in Genesis 11, starting in verse 5, But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. And then so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. So ultimately what took place is you have this evil king. You have the first real civilization on the planet, and you have an evil king, Nimrod, trying to reach and be like God. And the spirit of Babylon has been a spirit of evil since then. And then what we see when we fast forward 200 more years as we get to Abraham, 1131, And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot and the sons of Haran and his daughter-in-law Sarah, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So ultimately what they have is they were born into this land of the Chaldeans. The land of Ur is slightly south of Babylon. then God tells Abram to leave that area, and it says in verse 4, 12:4, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he parted from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. The language of the Chaldeans was a language that Abraham would have been familiar with. He was born into that language and that culture. God told him to get up and leave, where he goes to Haran, and then he ends up going down to the land of Canaan, which is the land of Israel. Fast forward an additional 1,000 years, and then you have David. Fast forward an additional 400 years, and now where we're at is we're at Daniel. And what has taken place in Daniel is the Chaldeans, or the Babylonian Empire, is now stretched into Lebanon and finally into Israel. The spirit of evil that is spread across known civilization at the time is definitely a spirit of evil, because the other piece we see is when finally the Babylonians fall, and we'll see in Daniel when they fall because of the Persians, it is later on that Daniel sees an angel, and the angel tells him that he was trying to get to him, but the prince of Persia was too strong and he couldn't defeat him. Ultimately, what he's saying is the evil demonic spirit over Persia was a very mighty, mighty spirit. And obviously the spirit over Babylon is a very mighty spirit. It's an evil spirit that has been on the earth from the very beginning. It's always been a satanic plan to build an empire, a worldwide empire of the Babylonian Empire. It's always been a satanic plan from the very beginning, from the lie that he gave to Eve, into Nimrod, all the way through where we are right now. So as we look at Daniel, and we see that he is being led off as kind of a gifted, noble man, probably handsome, young, that what he's being led off into is the Chaldeans, the original place of evil, the original civilization of evil and Satanism in the world, to learn their ways and learn their language and be exposed to their religion. So this is kind of a big deal what Daniel's being sent off to, but a reminder, God said to Jeremiah that he's going to bless these people being led off into captivity, that they will then prosper and grow into the knowledge of him because of this captivity. So, again, another idea that God always uses the evil of Satan for his good. Everything is good in God's eyes, so even evil is used for his good. And this is just an example of it. So, hope this has given you an insight into the satanic evilness of Babylon. That's always been there. Again, it was there way back. Abraham was born in there, and now here we are 2,700 years later, and we see Babylon finally conquering Israel. So, hope these videos are helping. It's definitely a good idea to kind of get some insight into kind of the geography and the history of Shinar, the Chaldeans, and Babylon. So, hope these videos are helping. If you have any comments, put them below. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. If you feel called to support this channel to Patreon, that link is below. But the most important part of this channel, we take prayer requests, and never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.